Hello and welcome to another episode of Waracle Talks. I'm your host today, David Lowe, Chief AI Officer at Waracle. For those that don't know us, Waracle is a digital product consultancy. We build exciting things in data, AI, mobile, and other technologies for ambitious clients, mainly in regulated sectors like finance, health, and utilities across the UK and Europe. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. We've got two old friends of mine from past lives who have great thoughts on AI and the world of generative AI in particular and how it affects the world of work. Firstly, we have Richard Lennox, an old colleague from Skyscanner who was part of the growth from Skyscanner's startup through to the unicorn that exited for a couple of $1 billion about 10 years ago and then moved on to Current Health, where he repeated the trick and now he consults scale-ups and startups across Scotland and how to grow and capture the technology market as it changes. And secondly, Janet Balneaves, who comes today from Shopify, who's a product director in that fast-growing retail company that's changing the world of retail for craft companies and people that don't want to build bricks and mortar shops. Janet has a world of experience from companies like JP Morgan through Skyscanner, through startups and Trustpilot, and then on to Shopify just now. They bring great perspective to us and we're grateful to them for their time today. What is a career in tech these days? Not getting too far ahead of ourselves, but how will people be disrupted by everything we've just said? And then secondly, how will businesses be disrupted by everything we've just said? And which ones are more likely to get disrupted first?
I think the overlap of roles is like you would have a team, you would have your engineers, your designers, your data person, your product person, but the overlap of roles and what people can do for themselves is completely changing. So I don't know what things will look like in the future. I think it'll all come down to the individual and what tools they're able to use and how they're able to leverage them. And I think there's this interesting, what do you want your role to be? Right. Question coming up, because I don't think we know, but it's changing a lot.
But organisationally, how can you force it? You were at Turing Fest last year. You might have seen Intercom doing their presentation. They were making the point that you can kind of enable it. So they tell designers, have a go at coding the thing before you sign it over.
Yes.
They still have their process, right? But dabble with it the way the developer would to get it right. It comes back to thinking, doesn't it? And developers can do a bit of design and it makes the participation different. Now, their team's not any smaller. It's a point I was going to come to about do more with less or more with more. Come back to that. But how do roles morph and how do you stop people getting territorial pretty quickly? I've seen in a client where we tried to encourage that. Designer said, nope, I do the designs. And how do you prevent that kind of thing happening? It's not an AI problem, but it will exist.
Well, it's been a problem forever. And, we're constantly, it's the silos. Most businesses, that transition between multiple silos, I'm going to do the design, then I'm going to pass it off to, or I'm going to do a product definition or a business analysis. I'm going to pass it to a designer, then I'm going to pass it to an engineer or a group of engineers, depending on the scale. Then I'm going to pass it to an operations person, then maybe an implementation person who's got to roll it out. Then there's a support team that's at the other end that's managing while it's in production. Like that whole flow of how value is delivered is shrinking, not in terms of maybe people or people doing that role, but those different elements have to merge. And actually, a lot of the frameworks from Agile all the way through of cross-functional work and into squads, you've mentioned squads at Waracle, like all of that was designed to try and break those silos. Now we're saying those silos are going to be broken even further by the technology that is going to enable you to act and deliver different persona type work. So we're all moving down. I think the real challenge then is where you're going to produce the outcome. Interestingly, I was reading somewhere over the weekend, one of the big construction companies was saying he is advertising for apprenticeships and yeah, and one of their lines is one of their lines in their advert was, come and work in construction, we won't be prompted out of existence. And I'm like, yes, but I'm going to tell you this. The forefront, I think the construction industry will want to be one of the most disruptive industries because you're going to have things operating at heights that today need scaffolding, window cleaning, like for construction, window cleaning. You're already seeing drones doing that, who can operate at height and safety. You know, lifting weights, and yes, it might be augmented, but I think you can't say any industry isn't going to change over time.
No.
So, you know, technology is going to evolve. The question is, how adaptable is the team to that evolution? And I think it is, you are going to have to produce outsized outcomes with less resource spent. Now, it's not going to say there's going to be less people, but those people will have to produce more outcomes.
Yes.
And I think that's the way I see it, and better outcomes for businesses. So you won't, you know, I don't think, you know, there'll be the one-off businesses, the one or two that are going to build unicorns from a two-person company. That's going to be 0.01% of all unicorns. It's not going to be top. There's still going to be a measure of human enablement in business. Otherwise, like, what are we doing? But you will be seeing 200, 300 people versus the 1,200 it was for Skyscanner. Like, you know, I think that's more realistic.
I think things top out earlier than they would have done. So there's a level of growth you get to, but it's probably not as high as it might have been with the same or better outcomes. But where you might have had a linear plan to grow 10 to 50 to 100, you know.
But bear in mind, outcomes don't have to be success either. And I think that's the part of the challenge. Like you could have an outcome that is, I failed this thing, this project 2 years earlier than I would have.
Yeah.
Because you learned a lot more faster. Like, that's a good outcome. Even though, you know, you've invested and you've done the project and it's failed. Whereas those projects that lasted 5 years, and I think some of your clients will suffer that. I think one of the biggest, and whether I say this in this podcast, is one of the biggest is the business model where time and materials is effectively what you pay for. It will really struggle in the next 2 or 3 years, because you'll be expected to deliver a lot more with a lot less if you're in that model. So it's not so much is the business going to get broke. I think the business model needs to reflect more the outcomes than say, I'm gonna give you a day rate for a person. And I see that as a consultant, like giving someone a day rate doesn't add value. So actually, you know, it's not good for me, and I have to think of different ways to, you know, to think about how you get paid for outcomes, not for not for your time.
There's modelling going on, and we're doing it like everybody else will be, but some are a little bit further ahead. Globant, one of the huge consultancies, started to offer token-based instead of T&M. So you paid for the throughput that it took them to hit a goal. Now, that's not the outcome, and it could be gamed really easily by inexperienced people, but they were at least thinking about how to change it. Now, they got slaughtered for doing it. The share price tanked the day they announced it, because nobody really understood how it was going to work. But they were trying to get to a way that isn't human time. It was just outcome time. And then they could marginally reduce it as they went. That's a different way to do it, at least.
Yeah. And that thinking has to happen. Because you struggle to say, my time is valuable. Actually, my knowledge, my experience, the mind share is valuable. And how that's applied to your problem is valuable, is much more important right now than saying, I'm going to give you a day a week. Because what do you get for that?
I've heard people make the argument, not so much in our world, but in product development, that you could do more with more, because more people to be empowered to do more things you'll always have more things you never got to. You know, there's always growth you never quite reach. You've talked about projects that end quickly, which might have run for 5 years before. That 5-year run stopped you trying something else. So if you've got more people trying more things, you actually end up with more people. But is it more people and agents together as a group, or is it more humans? I don't know, but I've seen somebody making the argument that you don't stop hiring people anytime soon, because you want them to keep doing more things and unlock growth. I mean, Trump was talking the other day about 20% growth, right? Pie in the sky. But is that possible because you can get people to do more than they would have done? Rather than just start saying, right, we'll have less people. That just seems like the old school cut first answer and see what happens.
Yeah. I don't know, but I think I think it all comes back to collaboration and outcomes. Like if you're incentivized where you work to be measured on, I'm a designer, what did I produce? You're going to feel very threatened by anyone else doing any designs, and you don't want to collaborate. But if you're incentivized to kind of solve problems, have outcomes, and collaborate as a team together on that, I think it'll pan out very well. You just kind of overlap your roles a little bit more. You still feel secure in your role, aside of how AI and LLMs are kind of taking it away. But I think in the companies where it's not like that, I think it's very difficult and you're going to feel very threatened.
But in our world, we've been through things at Skyscanner like rocks and pebbles, but we're always trying to constrain what we do to make sure stuff gets done. So in a way, are you taking some of those constraints away because you've got throughput?
So I think you are, because you're improving throughputs. What you're saying, and product development is always like this, there are 100% more ideas than the things that you can actually work on. And if there is a way to get through more on that list faster, then you will experiment your way to find the thing that works. That is ultimately what we're trying to do. So if you keep the same team and they are able to get through 100 things rather than 50 things, then chances are you're going to find the things that are actually on that list that are really working for your customers. And then you can double down on those. The real challenge is actually the other side of that. So yes, that's in building stuff, but the other side of that is the more you put out, the more you have to operate, the more your customers have to have things. And so there's another element of, does it allow you to kill more stuff that's in production? But actually, how do you think about that cost, that operational overhead of doing more, and how that cascades? So yes, you can do more, but it will have a consequence somewhere down the line. And you've got to try and find that balance. What's the right pace for your customer, and for your team? And then add to that, I wouldn't necessarily say it should open the floodgates in the same way either. But it's yes.
In a world you could do everything, does quality fall though as well? Is kind of what I wonder, because you're not forced to think. Like, because you end up doing so much, like, you didn't really need to do that. So, like, you're spread so widely that it just becomes slop.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting. Like, as we build our own little tools that are duplicates of other tools, that are duplicates of everyone else's tools, like, how much of them have we done? The ones we talked about right at the start that we've built in the last 2 or 3 weeks of, hacking around. Have we really thought about quality?
I haven't thought about maintenance. Like you're talking about, then people now that you've got 200 people using it.
I've got no choice.
You have to keep maintaining it. Yeah. So what happens to all these apps that we just throw out there, and then people are using it, and then you go, I can't be bothered with this anymore?
There's an old school way. I sort of reacted to that by saying I'll just open source it and let the world figure it out. Now it's there and being used. It doesn't have to be mine. We're not going to make any money on it, right? So just give it away and see what happens.
That would work.
I'm happy with that.
If there's a community skilled enough to do it.
Sure.
But bear in mind, people using it, those 200, of the 200 people, I would say, other than the 3, you and your mate that built it, just want it to work. Just want it to do what it does.
But there'll be an iOS developer with a big prostate out there somewhere that I find. Then it's off my.
I'm waiting for Dave putting that in the Slack. So after this podcast goes out,
how do you source for that?
A poll on Slack, clearly.
LinkedIn,
maybe you find that
I've got one already.
Find that one person who wants to help you out and build it. But maintenance is a thing, and actually, it's fine for all these little tools that we don't want to. If you built your business on technology and on these tools, you and your customer base is, let's say, hundreds of thousands, millions, paying you a subscription. Maintenance and operations becomes a thing. Yes, you can automate a lot of that, but it's that construct of, we talked about how do you get it to done, and then we had a conversation where done is, it's out in production, it isn't in dev. Like, actually, done is when's the 1,000th person using it? When's the 100,000th person getting the value out of it you said it is? Like, that, I think, is part of that shrinking of those silos. And those things is, you're going to have to think about those things in the future. I don't give a shit too much about the quality for the apps that are built, though, just for me. And I will fix them if it has a bug. It's got to, it has the purple gradient on some of them. I know that. And I'm laughing at that because
All the text got M dashes in it. Yeah.
would I go and fix that? Like for my own little tool, probably not. Do I care? If I was then going to actually push it in a different way, I would probably have to think about those things. So there is a degree of, it isn't just put an idea out into the world and see if come. You have to still, if your business is built on these things, you still have to think about outcomes and usage in 3-5 years time.
Oh, you still need to think about what are people saying about the product. Are they negative about it? Are they positive about it? Because that'll tank a product very quickly. So it doesn't.
We ran an experiment with a pension company last year to build an engagement tool, and it's not a throwaway. They actually put it out to the world. But the idea was we built it, started in Firebase Studio instead of Lovable, within the Google suite. Claude Code built it, got released through the gates in 4 days, done from an idea. So it worked. We've spent longer maintaining it than we did building it. So at Christmas time, it launched at Christmas while people were off and getting thinking about holidays because it's a holiday planning tool effectively. Then they told us, oh, by the way, we're emailing 900,000 people. You can't agent your way out of that. That's just old school DevOps and scaling and stuff. And then you're actually in the game of watching it hot with the 1,000th person coming through and see what you find.
And see where it falls
Nothing
over.
broke, but you still had to wait and find out. We used some agents to watch logs. So there was some automation of watching what went on just to make sure it was okay. Because nobody wants to be sitting watching a screen at Christmas. But
we've all been there.
Yes, we have.
Go back to 2010,
Boxing Day rush every year.
2010. And Skyscanner's value possession, which is what we measured, was through the floor.
Yeah.
We're all looking at graphs of each server. Why is it working? And it was Christmas, Boxing Day, and there was support things going out. 5 years later, we pretty much automated most of that out, and that wasn't the thing. So even then, you go back that time. Is now any different? Are we going to see the same? I think it is. It's just how the tools that we'd use, and you go back to people side. I think it's. We are probably past the point now where you can just hire deep specialists. You want the specialism, but they'll have to be broader.
Yeah.
They'll have to be more generalist by its nature and see the world outside of their silo. So I'm not saying they wouldn't have that specialism and bring that value, but they'd have to have the ability to adapt and change and reflect and probably be more generalist in that approach.
I was going to make a point about that. Sorry to butt in, pardon me, but I'm one of the few people that was a webmaster 32 years ago or thereabouts. But you did everything, and that split design and code.
It's like the DBA of the web world.
And then code split back and front, back end split data and DevOps. It's like amoebas. There's never a year goes by something doesn't divide.
Yes.
But it's starting to go the other way. Like over 30 years, it'll be a diamond because all of these roles will start to consolidate again because people will be able to do more things than they were. And actually, where do you end up? And what does a junior person come in and actually want to be?
Yeah.
Because they're still teaching people, you're a Python developer. You're coming out of uni, you know a bit more, but not in any detail. So you do kind of get pushed down because degrees are subdivided as well. You come out as a data scientist or you'll come out as a Python backend specialist or whatever. Again, coming back, what's a career then?
Yeah.
What do you enter? There was an interesting experiment. I think MIT gave 2 teams the same problem to build an app. They both got Claude Code. It's about 6 months ago when Claude Code wasn't as good, but still. One was 2 years junior-ish, the other was 8 years senior. And they raced. They both got to the app at the same point, to the same standard. But when they dug into the working, the seniors actually left a trail behind of what they'd done, why they'd done it. They'd been watching and accepting. The other lot had vibed it and hadn't left any trail of how they got there.
Well, this is interesting because I think it was our CEO kind of said like shipping an app or something now is like shipping without saving your source code. And it's interesting because at work I'd built something, I've got to hand something over. So I was like, I've got like a nice site, it's got all of the things. And then I realized I didn't have a GitHub repo for it. No one could read the queries that were behind it. And I was like, well, the site on its own is nice, but they actually need to know the workings behind it. So now there's a repo and all of that. And I'm like, God, I have to go back to thinking like a developer now, not as a product person. I have to kind of have all of that trail.
Yeah, well, I find that interesting because that is such such a thing for a tool to do for you, which is how do I capture everything that went into this and got us to here,
Yeah, and you need to
and
kind of
keep that log, that rolling log, and then have that history and then pull out the salient points.
like
So it's
mid-session
almost
or end of session, you kind of need to go summarize all of this and like save the salient points for next time,
so
etc.
that we know.
Because you can't remember how you got there.
And it, that becomes a default session control, and it's the same with documents. It's the same with everything. Like how you, and it goes back to like consumer world. That's okay, but I think what's really interesting is that career path has never been linear. For some, I think it probably has, and for generations before ours, and depending on where we draw the line on ours, it was a career ladder. I don't think there is such a thing as a straight line career. Going to be you move from engineer to engineer two to senior engineer to et cetera, all the way up. Like I just don't think that's the way the world's going to work.
Yep.
And it will be more about traits and skills than it will be about discipline and leadership, which will be the kind of career directional stuff. But if you looked at today, the reason I think you want seniors with the discipline, but who understand their job is to solve problems. So that probably takes out anyone. The juniors coming through, the grads that are still so malleable in how they do things and want to learn. And yes, they're doing vibe coding and doing stuff. They don't know about the discipline of problem solving. But if you marry those two things together, the problem you've got is this middle ground, the kind of software engineer 2 through senior engineers, where they've spent 10.5 years being Python developers or front-end developers or now iOS developers, which is probably around 10 years now as well.
17 or so.
And actually, that group has been narrowed down into a specialism that is really then difficult. And I think that's the group that we need to work with to help bring them into the more senior bucket, which is understanding about the problem solving and the discipline and the elements and how they manage that, because they're the ones that I genuinely, that I see in the businesses I work with, they're the ones that are kind of less engaged in moving this forward, more fearful of the change because they're not experienced enough to understand things in a certain way, but then too experienced to feel like they have to go back to the start, which is why they do, and compete with a set of grads.
Yeah.
And that's always a challenge. And I don't see that as an engineering thing. I see that in...
That's in every discipline.
That's marketing as much as it is engineering.
Yeah.
It's in copywriting,
Yes.
which feels like the one that's... Copywriting isn't about the words. It's about what is the story you're trying to get people to understand, and then translating that into the medium.
And translation is the same, which is never about the words. It's about the context of the words.
Yeah, and actually context is critical. Like, you see if you do medical device translation.
Oh, yeah.
It is phenomenal. Like, it in of itself is different. Trying to trade off colloquialisms within English is bad enough. Try and do that across multiple languages, and it has to be highly accurate. So there's real changes that come in, and you can't just fire medical translation into Google Translate. No. You can. What you need to do is apply the context.
Yes.
Which doesn't work. And so actually, if you build that translation engine to be based on a whole bunch of context. Now today, that context in that world could be the entirety of Grey's Anatomy and everything and a medical degree.
Yes.
To provide that context into a model, which then will provide better translations. And that's possible today. Previously, you'd have 3 or 4 humans essentially competing to get to the right point. So things will change. But it's how do you help people understand that? I'd still think a translator's job will exist. What it will be, though, is leveraging a whole suite of agentified translators.
It'll be like the final review and check. They won't be doing,
Yeah.
it won't be taking them as long. They won't be doing the actual work. They'll be orchestrating the work and the context.
And a level of trust that you could put two agents against each other and still not quite trust the process, but human to finish it off.
Yeah.
Same with code to this day. I mean, Gergely O'Roche used to work with us. He's been writing a lot the last couple of months, especially through the Christmas rush with Claude Code, that he's trying to invest in code review tools that bring the original prompt with them and everything in between, like you just said. So if something's presented as a code review, you're not just looking at blind code, you're looking at why it was requested in the first place, or what conversation happened to get you to that. But did you get it wrong and argue with it? So,
and this is this thing, like, there's no reason why you cannot record every session today and just capture everything you do with these tools and build that into context. Now, you then have to produce something. So your prompt history for one of these apps starts with, help me write a PE, ask me the kind of product problems that I want to solve, and record that. And output that, and then you get that chain. Right? All of that's solvable in the same way as meetings are solvable, notes are solvable now. So I think you kind of got to work with the tools to say it, but it is all about context.
Yeah. I mean, I don't write code, but it's all about context. So like I have separate project structures set up for what we're working on, and I kind of build more and more context about what we're doing. I do sometimes link into the code base, and then I kind of start Claude Code up on which context I'm working on today. And I have this whole repository, and then as I build things up, I'll save them down in Markdown files or what's relevant, and I'm just building up that context. And every week, how I work becomes just that little bit easier or quicker or faster because I've got more and more context of the decisions that have been made, the things that we're not doing, and it's fascinating.
One of the interesting things I've seen in our world, where we've got, to your point a few minutes ago, iOS developer that's done it for years, but out of necessity, we've got a React project and you have to move people around. We've seen two different ways it goes. Somebody who tries and goes, not quite buys the books, but tries to learn it old-fashioned way just by learning it. Somebody else who knows how to make a good app pairs up with a Claude and gets there 10 times quicker to production stuff. But it's the willingness to sit and converse with a thing that some people don't want to do, and how you actually improve yourself by doing stuff and arguing with it and building a thing and being told it's wrong, you know, so learning by doing much quicker. That's just experimentation again, and learning and failing quicker. But it's a cultural thing that some people just don't want to.
And this was the case in Skyscanner. I used to, because we group teams by feature sets effectively.
Yep.
And, you know, despite having an internal open source model, you kind of only worked in the code bases that you worked in. And a lot of that wasn't capability. It wasn't that someone couldn't. It was they didn't have the context to know what they were doing was right, wrong, or indifferent, or what the consequence of that change was in someone else's repository. And then people held on to that. Now I think you can build that context in. And actually part of the challenge is saying, you solve this problem. How do you give you context? So if you've still got an architecture that is, you know, well broken down into different services, such that you can still touch every service and change every service in a safe way without that knowledge, like, this is where the tools really help. And most engineers that I know don't want to sit waiting on the next team or the next.
No.
They don't want that time. They want
ticket. You know.
they want to get that stuff out and used. Some are happy, I guess. I guess there's probably a percentage that are happy with just plodding along and passing things over. But, you know, most of them want to get the stuff out being used. This is how it will accelerate over time. Whether we can shift some of them into, your job is not a Python engineer, your job is a problem solver. And I've been using product engineer a lot more than software engineer at the minute, just because the sheer difference in the label is telling. Does someone understand product engineering versus I'm a software engineer? And it's kind of an easier conversation to have because the labels are different now, and you can talk about product engineering as something different.
There's one thing I wanted to get to. We talk about disruption, and certain companies will be disrupted. There's a thing I've seen, not with clients, but people you speak to in the market. So massive banks that are US global, Chinese banks. They're big enough that they just do their own thing. One of your old employers built its own LLM on their own metal, so it's not in the cloud. They own it, so it's for them. At the other end, even big British banks aren't big enough to take those sort of risks. They can't afford the resource. I think Lloyd's announced yesterday they were training 67,000 people in AI to go back to that. That's the level. Some are way ahead. They've actually got teams in, I'll name Citibank because they advertise jobs. They've got ethical hackers of prompts and their models, and they're actually at that level. They've got InfoSec team purely working on the models they've built and things like that. At the other end, you'll have people who they'll disrupt themselves because either they can or they have to. So smaller companies that can afford the churn of doing things, there's no risk attached to it. But there's going to be some in the middle that are neither big enough or small enough to be able to do it. And are those the ones that either get disrupted out or give themselves trouble?
I think, not even to think about businesses, I think when I speak to people who work in the public sector, you see huge opportunities to make them more efficient, more effective, like note taking, for instance. A lot of them still have to write their own notes. It takes a lot of time. But because they don't have the tools to do it, they can. And you just think there is opportunity we were talking about disruption and being fearful, etc. But there's a huge opportunity to make people's jobs easier and quicker and better so they can focus on what their value add is rather than kind of note taking and note writing. And I think there's just this, it's just kind of makes me quite sad that we're not kind of able to kind of help them move faster with everything that we know now. There's places that it could quickly and easily be applied with the right kind of tools, etc., to make jobs easier and quicker without the whole fear, etc., and allow people to kind of be freed up to kind of do the job that matters.
Info security, data protection is quite often the thing that people will talk about as a reason not to use tools like this. And it is massively important. Like we shouldn't do that. I actually hear stories of companies that have basically said, here's our repository of documents, please do it. Now, they already don't have their data permissions right. So what they've given access to is everything from all the confidential stuff, including HR files, into the same models so they haven't had the controls. So they've just blanketly thrown it over the top of someone's SharePoint or someone's box file, whatever they use. And it's created problems. And you're kind of like, well, of course. Like you have to think about these things and think these things through. It's why Copilot is actually probably good because you're already paying Microsoft. All your stuff's already in Microsoft.
Yes.
So I can see why people are defaulting to Copilot in the same way as they default to Teams over.
Yeah, because the procurement process is kind of done there. They don't have to go through a different cycle and
actually you would encourage that because they will get that value. And it's that, can you get enough momentum of improvement? And it goes back to, how do you help someone get better at their own thing individually rather than just as a top down, this is how teams will work? Because if you can get someone looking at this saying, you know what, I can take an hour out of my day just by doing this.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll do other stuff. Maybe I won't do anything. Like in some industries, that's probably public sector, maybe where I'm going to do just enough. Chances are that's a minority as well. So actually, how can you give them just some tools to say, I do this one thing every week. I run this query on this data. I look at this report. I write these minutes up I run this meeting. I run this. How can I make that to be better? So how can I improve what I do and do it with less time? And if you can help people do that, I think that's where the middle ground of businesses that you talk about may not be able to build their own models. I honestly don't believe there'll be that many big generic LLMs that exist. We've got Claude, ChatGPT, we'll have DeepSeek, Gemini will probably, and there's maybe one that Microsoft comes out with underpinning Copilot at some point. But realistically, big, massive generic thing will be the basis for a bunch of smaller, very specific models that will empower more specific use cases. I think what you find with the opportunity for those businesses, not to build a big, massive financial institution model, but to actually leverage what exists in Claude or others to build something specific to your context in a much smaller, more dynamic way So the security issue and data protection is a big thing.
Yes.
I actually see a shift away from public cloud to on-prem for many of these tools and models.
Seen it starting to happen.
And that is solely a data protection problem. If I have it in my controlled environment on the public cloud, I can control where that data exits there. So that is a problem that we need to solve. I think there's some good constructs around security products and data coming out and tooling that lives around models that businesses should investigate, because they're around how can we do infosec over models? How do we do attack vectors? I was listening to a different podcast who talked about the analogy of, the analogy that they think about is, if you're running away from a bear, you got to run faster than the one person.
Yeah, the other person.
Right. And that's the kind of analogous for security. But now the problem is you're running away from 1,000 bears.
Yeah.
So running away faster than the next person isn't going to win, right? That's the change in security. Like that's the negative side of this is how many, if you're a hacker, how many agents could you set off at once? 1,000 is not hard. So they will find penetration. So actually, and it's the same problem as you get into quantum. As quantum becomes mainstream, how do you leverage and think about quantum technologies that, if we talk about in a decade, we'll probably be talking a lot more about democratized quantum compute. What's that going to change? That's not going to be 1,000 bears. That's going to be 100,000 bears, right? So you're talking levels of growth, and how are you going to think about that? So all these things need thought through. But in the end, how can you, I do think if you are in Microsoft and you're using SharePoint and Office 365 and you have the right settings and you can have someone come and help you with get that right, Copilot has to be your first part of call and use it. I wouldn't recommend Copilot for a lot of things, but to help people get on that ladder and start to experiment.
Yeah, and to see it's just then you can see what's possible rather than just, I don't know if it'll be any good, it probably won't, and then you can kind of see for yourself, try for yourself.
Yeah, and how does that organizational evolve? It goes back to you help people see how the art of the possible of improving their own thing, share it, but that starts with the folk at the top.
Yes.
And them saying, we're in the same boat. And we're going to share what we're learning as we go and doing that learning in public. Because this notion of, like, we'll do this in private because we're fearful of being seen to get it wrong has to change. Yeah. Otherwise, organizations will always be this. We'll wait 6 months and it's too late.